All right, let's move on to the next one. The skills of a full stack developer. Now, there are 5 different skill sets that you need to have if you want to become a full stack developer. The very first one, all right, it's a no-brainer. Front end. Now, front end, long story short, right, is the shop front that everything that your users is going to see. Basically, it's your forefront, your look and feel, right? Everything your user sees and interact. Now, this is the part that I mentioned earlier. HTML and CSS, they are not programming language. HTML is basically just a markup language where you use it to mark up to define how is the structure of your web page. Where's the header, where's the body, where's the title, which paragraphs come first, which paragraphs come second. All these paragraphs should be wrapped inside a division block, and after this division block you have another block, right? So along this line, along this train of thoughts, you can see HTML code is like a couple of different blocks and pieces that we put them together under a structure. So the browsers, when they read our HTML code, they know which content to display first, which content to display later. But don't forget, HTML codes only handles the structure, right? It does not handle the look and feel. Now, in order to make your fonts bigger, to change the color from yellow to black to yellow, to change the foreground color, background color from white to blue, and to change your font from Times New Roman to comics, for example, right? This is the job of CSS. CSS is basically like putting on makeup for you. So if you want to change how your website looks like, it's not the job of HTML, but it's the job of CSS. And last but not least, JavaScript handles the interaction. What happens when your users scroll to the end of the page? I want to load another set of records. What happens when my users click on a particular button? I want to display a pop-up box, for example, right? What happens when my user has been idling for more than 5 seconds? What should I do? Yada yada yada. Those are the jobs, right? The logic, the front end logic is handled by our JavaScript. Okay. Now, when you have front end, immediately you should be thinking about something called the back end. Right. Now, before you understand the back end, you have to understand how does the internet work. Now, the internet works this way. In web or internet, right, everything you see is actually handled by a server. It doesn't matter you're accessing a website, it's called google.com, you're accessing a website called delete.io, or you're accessing Gmail, right? You are accessing a server or a groups of server, a clusters of server sitting inside a data center. I'll give you a quick example, right? If you go to Chrome or Internet Explorer, you type in google.com, it's actually contacting your DNS server, domain name server. So this DNS server's jobs is to translate google.com into an IP address of the server. Now, if you visit google.com, it will then contact Google server in US. The IP address should be 60.112.18.15, something along the line. And if your location is detected, then you'll be routed to a server nearer to us, like Singapore or Sydney. Same thing. So if you visit Lazada, it will be hosted in Malaysia. So each of these company, this website, they have their own server and server farms. Even delete.io, we have our own server. We have our database servers, we have our WordPress servers, we have our class.delete.io, our online class servers, for example. So what happens is when you browse a web page, you enter google.com in the address bar, you're actually sending a request to the server. The server will respond to you based on your request, right? For Google's case, your request is a query string of the keywords that you want to search. Facebook will be a profile page of the person you want to visit. And Airbnb will be a list of houses nearby your vacation area, right? So when you send a request, the server will return a response which contains the web page and also the relevant images and stuff. So what is the backend doing? The backend's job is to generate your front end for you, which are HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Okay, so now you understand the relationship between front end and back end. Your front end code is the code that you write to display things, the look and feel, and the interaction. Your back-end code, the job is to generate those code that are needed for your front end. Okay, so in long story short, back-end is basically everything behind the scene. Now, the popular backend languages that I mentioned earlier, you have a couple of options. You have PHP, you have Node.js, JavaScript. If you are using C Sharp, you have ASP.NET, and if you are using Python, you have Django. So these are considered the four most popular type of web framework that we use in our backend. So the job of backend development is very simple. Number one, generate the HTML codes that the front end needs. But functional wise, is actually help us to encapsulate the business logic so that the sensitive information, for example, Uber or Grab will not let you know what is the formula that they calculate your fare. So those calculations of fare, understanding the driver's supply and passengers demand, right, is hidden behind their backend servers. So they encapsulate their business logics. But at the same time, they also integrate with third-party services like your email services, SMS services, your inventory systems. And last but not least, back-end servers are actively involved in reading and writing data to the databases, so they will decide what sort of information to be displayed to you. Okay, so these are some of the basic jobs that back-end development has to be done. So if you realize, the last thing that I mentioned is about database. So you do need to learn how to handle databases. Now, there are two main types of databases out there in the market when it comes to web development. 80% of the websites are running on SQL servers. It could be MySQL, or it can also be SQL servers from Microsoft SQL. Now, database is where we store our data, and these two databases are the most popular database engines for structured and also relational data. Okay, that's because back then when we have our data, the data is, has less variety. We don't have Facebook, we don't have Twitters, we don't have all this sort of massive data or big data that comes in. So we always use a structured database to store our data. Now, as time goes by, if you have a less rigid or you require very flexible data format, like when we work with IoT devices or sensors data, right? We can also use a non-relational database such as MongoDB or Firebase, which is what we call the unstructured database. So unstructured database, for the two examples that I show you here, right, they're usually document-based database, because a lot of times when we collect data, they're just in different formats of documents, like Facebook posts, Twitter's tweets, etc. Okay, but for you as a developer, right, when you're just beginning to enter your coding career, you just need to know that there are two major types. One is SQL for relational data, and one is no SQL for unstructured data. That's about it that you need to know. And along the way, you pick up the coding skills and language skills to help you to interact and communicate with the databases. Okay. Next, we look at hosting. So you have your front end settled, you have your back end settled, you know where to store your data, you know where to retrieve your data. Now you need a house, you need a place to put all this information into your server, right? Now, if the server is sitting on your laptop, people from the internet, people outside of your house, they are not allowed to access your computers because of privacy issues. You're worried about hackers, you're worried about your data being wiped off. So what you need to do, you need to host your website and web applications at somewhere that's more secure, more reliable, and more professional. Now, there are two main types of hosting solutions here. Hosting is like your physical storage space where you keep all the stuff, right? So if you use a shared hosting like HostGator or GoDaddy or even like Exabytes, right? It's like you are renting a unit inside a shopping mall. So basic features like electricity, internet, securities are provided, but you have very little flexibility, meaning that everything you want to add or you want to change something, right? You need to speak to the management. You need to write into the management and say, oh, I want to have a little bit of space on my hard disk. Is that okay? Or I want to extend my bandwidth to 10 gigabyte download per month, something like that. So that is what shared hosting is about. And shared hosting, a lot of times the performance rely on your host and also rely on your co-tenant as well, right? If somebody who shared the same server as you always occupy a lot of the resources, of course, relatively the resources that you are going to get is a lot lesser, right? Now, the second option is cloud computing. Cloud computing is like you rent a shop lot on the main street. You have your own flexibility. It's your own place. Basically, you rented a servers on the cloud, but you have all the flexibility, and it comes with a price where you need to sort out your own stuff. So you need to sort out your own internet, your company secretary, your mailing address. A mailing address here means your domain name, right? Because you need to have SSM registration, and also you need to have an IP address. So how do you match these two things together? And a lot of things you need to know, but you have the flexibility. So a popular cloud hosting solutions in Malaysia, we usually use AWS, okay, Amazon Web Service, Google Cloud, GCP, Google Cloud Platform, Microsoft Azure, and DigitalOcean. So these are the popular options that you have when you're opting for cloud hosting. For Lead, we are the partner of AWS and DigitalOcean. So our students get to play around with different cloud options as well, cloud hosting options. Now, last but not least, now you know how to write your front end code, you know how to write your back end code, you know how to store data using databases, and you know how to put your applications online so that people can see that, right? Last thing is you need to think about mobile applications. Now, remember I said earlier, mobile applications traffic still takes up about half of the traffic that we've seen. And if you go to any places, right, restaurants, when a family go out to makan, what do? They take a handphone, right? And when you go to a bus or you go to MRT, people use their mobile phone all the time. So mobile phones is definitely one of the key trends in the future. But the good news for you is mobile applications architecture is exactly the same as our web architecture. I'm not going to repeat the story about you go to google.com, but now I'm telling you, right? If you pull up your handphone today and you go to Facebook app, right? What it does is essentially a Facebook app is still sending the request to Facebook server, and we are going to retrieve. But this time around, we are not retrieving HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. We are retrieving the data in the format called JSON, JavaScript Object Notation, most of the time, or XML. And once we retrieve this data, we are going to use our mobile applications to render this data in the format that suits your operating system, whether it's iOS or it's Android. Now, when it comes to mobile applications development, right, we can broadly categorize them into three types. Number one, native application. Most of the time, right, for business applications, they don't really go into native applications unless you are very rich, because you need to hire two sets of developers, one to develop iOS, the other one to develop Android. But when do you see this most often? You see this in games and apps that require a lot of native features. So most of the time, games, they cannot afford to use hybrid solutions. They must access to all the native features of a phone in order to get all the graphics, all the processing power. If you are using a less taxing approach, right, meaning that you are just using it for business applications, browsing it, people just enter some details, browse your catalogs, and you can opt for something called hybrid applications. Now, hybrid application is still a native app, right? It looks like a native app, it behaves like a native app, and the process are all the same, except inside your hybrid app, right, is a native app wrapper that wraps around your application. Now, these applications are written using hybrid framework like Flutter, React Native, or even Ionic. So when we write applications and wrap them in those wrapper, it will run properly and function like as per normal in iOS or Android platform. And this is what we do with our most of our business applications. And this saves you a lot of time because you just need to write once, and then it can be used on both iOS and also Android. Now, if you're really, really tight on budget, right, you can still do something called web application. Now, web application is applications that is, I would say, fine-tuned or is tweaked to display and function properly on a web browser that comes with your mobile applications. Okay, so these are the three different types of mobile application development that you can refer to, you can consider. Long story short, mobile applications, right, runs on top of web architecture as well. Unless you are really doing an offline version like offline mobile games or offline notebooks or offline to-do lists. But nowadays, everything is on cloud. Everything is interconnected. So I can safely say that majority of the web applications and majority of the mobile applications run on the same web architecture as well.